I've explained how noun phrases and verb phrases must be correctly formed before they can be combined as clauses. In this part of the presentation, I'll mostly talk about combining clauses with other clauses. There are three types of clauses: independent, dependent, and matrix. He likes sports and she watched the game are independent clauses. They each form a simple sentence. Adding a subordinating conjunction like that or because to the beginning of the clause makes it dependent. It can no longer form a sentence by itself. A matrix clause cannot form a sentence by itself either. It needs a dependent clause. In the sentence, she knows that he likes sports, the dependent clause is the object of knows. Note that if the conjunction that is omitted, as in she knows he likes sports, the clause he likes sports is still considered a dependent component of its matrix clause. Dependent clauses are just as often combined with independent clauses. For example, she watched the game because he likes sports. There are four types of sentences: simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. A simple sentence can contain compound phrases. For example, Andy and Alice fix and program computers. The same two nouns and the same two verbs can be repositioned to form a compound sentence. Andy fixes computers and Alice programs them. Notice that there is a comma before the conjunction and in the compound sentence, but there are no commas in the compound phrases. Independent clauses must be separated with commas, but compound phrases should not be. If the same two clauses functioned as the object of a matrix clause, a comma before and would be optional. She knows that Andy fixes and Alice programs computers. This is a complex sentence, and it has two dependent clauses. A complex sentence can also combine one or more dependent clauses with an independent clause. The sentences Alice programs computers after Andy fixes them, and after Andy fixes the computer and Alice programs it, they will watch TV. These are both complex sentences. The first has one dependent clause and the second has two. When the independent clause follows a dependent clause, a comma must separate them. But a comma is not needed when the dependent clause follows the independent clause. A compound complex sentence contains one or more dependent clauses and at least two independent clauses. An example is, after Alice eats dinner, she will read a book, but Andy will play games. Two commas are needed to separate the three clauses in this sentence. Two common mistakes in writing clauses are run-on sentences and comma splices. An example of a run-on sentence is, birds fly in the sky, fish swim in the ocean. It contains two independent clauses. They could be written correctly as two separate sentences by adding a period after sky and capitalizing fish. Simply inserting a comma between sky and fish results in a comma splice. Adding a conjunction like and or but would correct this mistake. Birds fly in the sky and fish swim in the ocean. It's not uncommon for students to punctuate dependent clauses as sentences. Consider, until he left the room. It isn't a sentence, but there is sometimes an independent clause in the paragraph which it can be combined with. Replacing the subordinating conjunction until with a sentence adverb is another way to fix this error. For example, finally he left the room. A sentence fragment error refers to a clause in which an essential component is missing. People swimming in the ocean is an example. Participles need auxiliary verbs to function as main verbs. Adding the word were before swimming fixes this sentence. It's also not uncommon for students to try to use a noun as both the subject of the sentence and the object of a preposition. In Chicago has cold weather is an example. To fix it, you could simply remove the preposition or rewrite it as the weather in Chicago is cold. Compound sentences are most often formed with coordinating conjunctions. There are 7 of them: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. The acronym FANBOYS is helpful for remembering them. The word for is used much more often as a preposition. Actually, using it as a conjunction is British English. Most Americans don't use it, but the British I've met consider it essential, and you will encounter it in popular British literature. An example is they often argue, for they have different goals. For represents a similar relationship as the conjunction and, but it also indicates a relationship of reason, like the subordinating conjunction because. Nor is a negative coordinating conjunction. It often coordinates along with the negative adverb not, as in, he does not drink beer, nor does he smoke. It's also used with the correlative conjunction neither. He neither drinks nor smokes. Note that instead of using the word either in he doesn't drink and I don't either, the traditional syntax would be he doesn't drink and neither do I. When either doesn't form an adverb, it should be used with the conjunction or. The O in fanboys or represents mutually exclusive possibilities. We can leave now or we can wait for the next bus. Either adds emphasis to the mutual exclusivity. Either we leave now or we wait here for 2 hours. The coordinating conjunctions and but are the most common. You wouldn't expect many errors are made in confusing them, but the choice is not always clear-cut and can depend on the context. Consider she came by, but you were away, so she left this envelope. Another situation would be she came by and you were away, so we invited her to have lunch with us. Yet represents a similar relationship of contrast that but represents. You could either say, our bus left late, yet we arrived on time. Or, our bus left late, but we arrived on time, yet can emphasize that an expected event did not occur. Note that 5 of the conjunctions, and, nor, but, or, and yet, can all be used in compound phrases. For and so cannot. So is as versatile as the word that in its structural relationships. Like the conjunction for, it can express a logical relationship. Consider, she likes fruit, so I bought a melon. This meaning of so is similar to the phrase as a result. So is also used along with and in elliptical compound sentences. He likes pizza, and so do I. We are hungry, and so are they. Some grammarians will tell you that so is functioning like a pronoun, representing its antecedent. They would call so in so do I a proverb, and call so in so are they a proadjective. Others would classify so as a correlating conjunction similar to and neither do I. However, its part of speech isn't important to its punctuation here. That's not the case with the so in I arrived early so I could set the table. Unlike the coordinating conjunction in so I bought a melon, placing a comma before this so is a grammatical error. This so is a subordinating conjunction, and commas are never placed in front of them. If we switch the clause order to so I could set the table, I arrived early. A comma should be placed after table. Note the order of the clauses in the sentence, she likes fruit, so I bought a melon, cannot be switched. We cannot say, so I bought a melon, she likes fruit, or I bought a melon, so she likes fruit. The reason for the second clause, buying the fruit, is she likes it. In I arrived early so that I could set the table, the reason for the first clause, arriving early, is because she wanted to set the table. Both coordinating and subordinating uses of so represent relationships of reason. But there's a subtle difference. If so is forming a subordinating conjunction, we can add or omit the word that. I arrived early so that I could set the table. If so is forming a coordinating conjunction, we cannot add that. She likes fruit, so that I bought a melon. However, we have not seen the last example of the word so. Compound sentences can also be combined without conjunctions. We can combine them with conjunctive adverbs. These connectors either represent relationships of contrast or logical sequence. There are more conjunctive adverbs than there are coordinating conjunctions, but we use them less often, and the rules for punctuation are more complicated. Note that grammars will often list so as a conjunctive adverb of logical sequence. Its meaning as a coordinating conjunction is almost identical to the word consequently. When you connect two clauses with a conjunctive adverb, you are supposed to put a semicolon in front of it and a comma after it. Consider the compound sentences, you must study more, otherwise you will fail the class. And I like scary movies, however, my friend likes comedies. And finally, it began to storm. Consequently, the crowd dispersed. If you want to use academic words like therefore, thus, and nevertheless in compound clauses, you need to punctuate them with a semicolon and a comma. It is also possible to combine independent clauses just by adding a semicolon. These clauses must have an implicit contrasting or logical relationship. Consider, Americans call it an elevator. The British call it a lift. And I order dessert. Life is too short for counting calories. The requirement is that these clauses need to have an obvious relationship of contrast or logic. We saw that connecting two independent clauses with a comma is a comma splice error. There are two types of compound sentences where a comma can connect clauses: comparative correlatives and tag questions. Consider, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. What part or parts of speech are the words the forming? I would classify them as correlative conjunctions, and you simply need to place a comma before the second the. The clauses in tag questions are also connected with a comma, but this second clause is always elliptical. She can't speak English, can she? Is an example. One clause is always positive and the other is negative. The reverse here would be, she can speak English, can't she? In addition to connecting clauses, a lot of these connectors can modify them as sentence adverbs. All conjunctive adverbs can form disjunctive adverbs, but most disjunctive adverbs cannot connect clauses in compound sentences. Sentence adverbs either represent a relationship between clauses or the speaker's point of view. For example, we can use them in ordering a series of clauses with adverbs like firstly, secondly, finally, in conclusion. These could be used in the first sentences of a series of paragraphs, or they could connect four sentences in a single paragraph. They can represent changes in time frames between clauses like afterwards and next. Sometimes we need to make a break in our focus with the preceding clause, and the adverbs anyway and besides enable us to introduce an unrelated point. Good writing is mostly about combining clauses in meaningful ways. Disjunctive adverbs can clarify how your clauses relate to each other. In oral English, we also use interjections and vocatives to modify clauses to express a point of view or who we are speaking to. For example, wow, yes, and ladies and gentlemen. I prefer disjunctive to conjunctive adverbs because the punctuation is simpler, and the additional options for where disjunctives can be positioned Give me more control about the sound and emphasis of what I'm saying. No semicolons are required. You only need one comma if you position them at the beginning or in position, or two commas if you insert one in the middle position. The following simple sentences are the same clauses which were combined as compound sentences in the previous slide. Note the three options for positioning the adverbs. You must study more. You will fail the class otherwise. I like scary movies. My friend, however, likes comedies. It began to storm. Consequently, the crowd dispersed. Because of their similar meanings, we can replace the word consequently with so. It began to storm, so the crowd dispersed. She likes fruit, so I bought a melon. She likes fruit, consequently I bought a melon. Now let's look at how dependent clauses combine with independent clauses as modifiers. It's similar to the way prepositional phrases function as modifiers. In the sentence, the people who are swimming are my classmates, the dependent clause who are swimming modifies the noun people to form an adjective. Its function is to identify which people are the classmates. We could use a prepositional phrase to do the same thing. The people in the pool are my classmates. In the sentence, she is afraid that the dog will bite her. The dependent clause is modifying the adjective afraid as an adverb. We could alternatively say, she is afraid of the dog. The adverb clause, before he arrives, and the phrase, before his arrival, have the same meaning when combined with the independent clause, he will call us. In the previous slide, we saw a list of one-word sentence adverbs. Dependent clauses and phrases can also modify sentences. We can say, they won the game, which isn't surprising. Or, of course, they won the game. Notice the first words in the dependent clauses. Who, that, before, and which. They are either coded with black underlines like the prepositions or with blue underlines. The same type of connectors are used with dependent noun clauses. In the sentence, what you think matters to me, the subject of the sentence is the dependent clause, what you think. We could replace it with the noun phrase, your opinion matters to me. When a dependent clause functions as a subject or a verb complement, there is no independent clause. The main idea of the sentence is expressed by a matrix clause. In the sentence, that they won the game was not surprising. The dependent clause could again be replaced with a simple noun phrase. Their victory was not surprising. Noun clauses primarily function as the objects of verbs. For example, I know who stole the car. An equivalent noun phrase object would be, I know the thief's name. In the sentence, our main concern is that the children are safe. The noun clause is functioning as a predicate noun. Instead of being coded with blue brackets, blue braces are used. This corresponds to the dotted blue underline in our main concern is the children's safety. The verb is links the nouns concern and safety as referring to the same thing. Predicative adjectives are also indicated by dotted underlines. For example, the dotted aqua line under the word strong in your boyfriend looks strong corresponds to the aqua braces in your boyfriend looks like he works out. Notice that the first words in the dependent clause have either blue or black underlines. What, that, who, that, and like. One of the keys to mastering complex sentences is understanding these connector words. The blue underlines all indicate relative pronouns. It's the most common type of relative connector, but there are also relative determiners and relative adverbs. In other grammars, some of these connectors are classified as conjunctions. Sometimes all of them are. What's more important is how they are used with dependent clauses to form adjectives, nouns, or sentence adverbs. These are words that are traditionally classified as subordinating conjunctions. Like prepositions, they can be classified by the type of relationship they represent. The examples are possibility, degree, time, concession, manner, reason, and condition. A few of these conjunctions representing possibility can be used to form noun clauses, but most of their clauses form adverbs. Unlike relative clauses, which can form sentence adverbs, subordinate clauses form adverbs of verbs and adverbs of adjectives. Most commonly used conjunction, that, can also form adjective clauses. Let's compare the different types of connectors with adjective clauses. Relative pronouns are the most commonly used, but there is an important difference in the clauses they connect. Do you understand the difference in the relative clauses in the following two sentences? The woman who arrived yesterday is our English teacher, and our English teacher, who is a Canadian, also speaks French. The difference is related to the most common error that occurs in them, their punctuation. The first sentence has no commas. The second requires two commas to separate the dependent clause. Why is that? Let's consider the sentences without these modifiers. The woman is our English teacher. Our English teacher also speaks French. Who is the woman? There are many women. The phrase, the woman, doesn't identify her. You could say, a woman is our English teacher, or our English teacher is a woman. But you can't say, our English teacher is the woman. Remember that the article the indicates a specific person or thing, and the reader hasn't been given any information to identify this woman from any other woman. That's what the adjective clause does. And that's the reason it's called a defining clause. It's also called an essential clause or a restrictive clause. Never separate a defining clause with commas. The subject of the second sentence is clearly defined without the clause. Students typically have one English teacher each semester. The clause, who is a Canadian, is just adding more information. It's non-defining. It's also called non-essential or non-restrictive. Leaving out the commas that should separate it from the independent clause is considered a punctuation error. Another important thing about relative clauses is that when the relative pronoun functions as an object, it can be omitted. Consider, the question that he asked is important, and the woman who they met is a famous actress. It's equally correct to say, the question he asked is important, and the woman they met is a famous actress. In oral English, you could say, the question which he asked is important. But because this is a defining relative clause, it's more correct to use the relative pronoun that. Only use the pronoun which with non-defining clauses. Omitting who in the second sentence also avoids the need to use the objective case of the pronoun. Whom is technically more correct than who here, although it's usually not an issue. The woman whom they met is a famous actress. You could also use the pronoun that in this sentence. The woman that they met is a famous actress. It's a common practice in oral English, but it's considered a poor choice when you use that as a relative pronoun to refer to a person in written English. You may be unfamiliar with the term relative adverb. Examples are found in the following sentences. The hotel where we stayed was beautiful. The days when it rained were wasted. The reason why they were late doesn't matter. Where, when, and why are coded with dashed red lines. However, note that they all refer to the noun that they follow. This is why they are often called pronouns, even though they form adverbs within their dependent clauses. The relative determiner whose similarly refers to the noun people. In the people whose car was stolen took a bus. The last 6 relative clauses are all restrictive. They are essential for their subjects, so no commas separate them from it. Adjective clauses can also be formed with the conjunction that. Examples are The belief that there are UFOs is becoming more common, and the idea that he'll win the tournament is ridiculous. The sentence, the fact that he lied upset her, is similar. But note that the dependent clause is coated with blue braces. It's forming a noun. It's in a positive. The conjunction that can be omitted. The fact he lied upset her. If we omit the phrase the fact, then the clause can function as the subject. That he lied upset her. The same is not true of the previous two sentences, so you really should not omit the conjunction that in them. When we compare noun clauses that are made with subordinating conjunctions and those made with relative pronouns, the main difference is that the meanings of the dependent clauses are not dependent on the conjunctions, but the relative pronoun is essential to the clause's meaning. Let's look at the subordinate clauses in the first four sentences without their conjunctions. He often lies. He lied. I should buy this. And you drive or he drives. Their meanings are clear. In fact, in the first two sentences, the conjunction that is optional. Compare, she warned me that he often lies, and the point is that he lied, with she warned me he often lies, and the point is he lied. The only other conjunctions for making noun clauses are if and whether, and they represent similar relationships of possibility. I can't decide if I should buy this, and whether you drive or he drives is unimportant. Relative pronouns, on the other hand, form subjects, objects, and modifiers within their dependent clause, as well as relationships to their matrix clause. In the sentence, I am sorry about what happened, what is the subject of its noun clause? That clause is functioning as the object of the preposition about. In the sentences, what he said was true, and I always compliment whichever dress she buys. The verb objects have been moved to the beginning of the dependent clause. Now compare the sequence of the words when, we, and will in the direct question, when will we eat, with their sequence in the indirect question, do you know when we will eat? Just like what in I know what we will eat, when has been moved to the beginning of its clause. But unlike the will in the direct question, when will we eat, the will in the indirect question remains in its normal position in the verb phrase will eat. A few conjunctions can represent more than one type of relationship. The word since in I've known her since I was a child expresses a time relationship. In since you're not working tomorrow, you ought to go to the park. Since represents a relationship of reason. While represents a time relationship in I was cooking dinner while they were watching TV. But in while I appreciate the offer, I cannot accept the money. It expresses a concession. Languages and their grammars typically slowly but steadily change over the centuries. A grammar controversy from the late 1950s is instructive for understanding conjunctions. Way back then in the 1950s, the biggest radio and television advertisers were cigarette companies. When a commercial for Winston cigarettes started using the slogan, Winston tastes good, like a cigarette should, many professionals and academics objected. They said the word like was not a conjunction. It was a preposition, and the slogan should be corrected to say, Winston tastes good, as a cigarette should. The newscaster Walter Cronkite, who was said to be the most trusted man on television, refused to say the slogan. Since then, like has been welcomed into the closed class of subordinating conjunctions. In fact, it has gone on to become as versatile as the words that and so in the parts of speech it can form. It's also now a filler word like okay, right, and like, you know. We looked at adverb clauses of comparison in the previous presentations on noun phrases and verb phrases. One of the structures for making comparisons places the word as before and after an adjective or an adverb. For example, she is as wise as an owl, and I don't drive as slowly as she does. The second as is a conjunction. The first as is an adverb. This same type of structure is used with so and such. Consider, it rained so hard that we stopped the car. And she is so angry that I'm afraid to call her. The conjunction that is optional and can be omitted in these dependent clauses. We can say, it rained so hard we stopped the car. However, the adverb so is essential. We cannot say, it rained hard that we stopped the car. In saying, she is angry that I'm afraid to call her, has an entirely different meaning. The adverb such is also essential in, he did such a good job that I gave him an extra $10. So and such are adverbs of degree, like very and quite and extremely. The sentence is, it rained very hard, so we stopped the car. Or, he did an extremely good job, so I gave him an extra $10. Have similar meanings. Note that the clauses, she is so angry and he did such a good job, are independent and can stand alone as sentences. But I don't drive as slowly or she is as wise cannot. The conjunction as, when used alone, represents a relationship of reason. For example, we watched TV as there was nothing else to do. It also combines with the conjunctions if or though to form adverbial clauses of manner. Examples are, he behaved as if he owned the place, and she acts as though she is worried. The adverb even is an amplifier. It's unnecessary, but adds emphasis in, we didn't even have tickets, but he let us in. It also forms compound conjunctions with if and though. If normally expresses a condition, as in, if you are a member of the team, you can sit there. When if is combined with even, it indicates the condition is insufficient in some way. Consider, even if you are a member of the team, you cannot sit there. Though and although express a concession. Consider, though we didn't have tickets, he let us in. Combining even with though just adds emphasis. Even though we didn't have tickets, he let us in. Note that conjunctions of concession are usually interchangeable, meaning that they can be placed before either clause. Compare, although he let us in, we didn't have tickets with he let us in, although we didn't have tickets. Whereas is another one of these interchangeable conjunctions of concession. We can say, whereas we chose to study history, they were required to. Or we can reposition the conjunction and say, we chose to study history, whereas they were required to. Note that a comma separates the two clauses in the last four sentences, but not in the first three. This is because the dependent clause comes before the independent clause in the last four. If we move the dependent clause to the end of the sentence, the commas should be omitted. Whichever clause comes last has a little more emphasis in the sentence. Also notice that we can move the dependent clause in the first sentence to the beginning. As there was nothing else to do, we watched TV. However, we cannot move the clauses in the next two sentences. We cannot say, as if he owned the place, he behaved, or as though she is worried, she acts. The reason is because these clauses are forming predicate adverbs. They aren't modifiers of their verbs, they are complements. The adverb only also combines with the conjunction if. There is not much difference in the meanings of the first two sentences. She will only go to the party if Bob invites her, and she will go to the party only if Bob invites her. But note that the order of the clauses in the first sentence cannot be switched. Saying, if Bob invites her, she will only go to the party, implies there is some part of the invitation that she will not attend. If we start the second sentence with, only if Bob invites her, we cannot follow it with, she will go to the party. We must change the order of she and will. Only if Bob invites her will she go to the party. However, if we omit the word only, the order of the clauses becomes irrelevant. The clause sequence is also not an issue in if only Bob had invited her. she would have come to the party. The compounds only if and if only clearly have different meanings. Only if expresses a requirement, and if only expresses a wish or desire. The adverb then also combines with if to add emphasis. The conjunction unless expresses an unrealized condition. The following two sentences express opposite outcomes. And then adds emphasis. Unless you do your homework, you can't watch TV. If you do your homework, then you can watch TV. However, omitting then doesn't change the meaning, and then must be omitted if the independent clause comes first. You cannot say, then you can watch TV if you do your homework. Then represents a logical relationship between the condition and the main clause. If you multiply 11 by 3, then you get 33. There are four types of conditionals: present conditionals, real conditionals, unreal conditionals, and past unreal conditionals. These classifications are based on the tenses of the clauses. The same tense is used in both the dependent and independent clause in present conditionals. Examples are, if you divide 6 by 2, you get 3. And if you need anything, just ask me. When the present tense is used in the dependent clause, it's much more common to use a future or conditional tense in the independent clause. Examples are, if you win the game, I will buy everyone dinner. And if they come early, we could all leave together. These are examples of real conditionals. When the past tense is used in the if clause, the result is an unreal conditional. Consider, if I won $1 million, I would buy a big house. And if I had the money, I could lend it to you. It is unrealistic to expect this speaker to buy a big house or lend you money. Conditional tenses are used in the independent clauses, but the condition isn't expected to occur. If the if clause in unreal conditionals uses the verb to be, it is often in the subjunctive mood. Consider, if he were at the party, he would be talking to her. Were is the plural and second person form of the verb to be. However, he is a third person singular pronoun and doesn't normally combine with the were form. This is an indicator that the statement doesn't report an actual event. He isn't at the party, and he's not going to be talking to her. Compare that with, if he was at the party, he probably saw her. The simple past tense is used in both clauses. They indicate that it's unknown whether or not the events occurred. In past unreal conditionals, both clauses refer to something in the past that didn't occur. The past perfect is combined with the past conditional tense in, if Bob had called me, I would have helped him. It stresses that the cause-effect relationship of Bob not calling and not being helped. The past present continuous is combined with the past conditional tense in, if he hadn't been talking on his phone, he wouldn't have wrecked his car. It stresses the cause-effect of relationship of talking on the phone and wrecking the car. We saw an example of the subjunctive mood with the unreal conditional. Most of the sentence examples in this presentation are said to be in the indicative mood. Its verb forms are used for making statements and asking questions. The subjunctive mood refers to suggestions and opinions about what could be or should occur. The subjunctive mood is actually not used much in British English. However, American schools will expect you to be familiar with it. It refers to a predicate verb form's agreement with its subject. Other than the verb to be in the unreal conditional, if clauses, it occurs in noun clauses which function as the objects of about a dozen verbs. Consider the matrix clause, Bill suggested that we watch a movie. There's nothing especially unusual about the base form of to watch being combined with a plural pronoun. We watch movies, you watch movies, they watch movies. However, the mood is revealed when we use a third-person singular pronoun. You should notice something unusual in the sentence, Ivy insisted that he watch a movie. The following two sentences all demonstrate the subjunctive mood. Her teacher recommended that she study harder. They demand that he leave. In part one, we saw that in order to form a clause, a verb has to be finite. And finite verbs normally take an S suffix in the present tense when they combine with a third-person singular subject. The predicate verbs in the next two dependent clauses are forms of to be. The law requires that he be punished. I wish she were here. The second sentence uses the same form as the unreal conditional, if she were here. However, if we try to use that clause, she were here, as an object of the previous verbs, we see that the base form of to be is used for most subjunctive mood sentences. Bill suggested that she be here. Ivy insisted that she be here. Her teacher recommended that she be here. They demand that she be here. The law requires that she be here. In British English, it would be more likely for modal verbs to be used in these clauses. Bill suggested that she should be here. Her teacher recommended that she ought to be here. They insist that she must be here. Changes in normal verb tense also occur in reported speech as opposed to quoted speech. The general rule is to shift the tense back in time and to not use quotation marks. For example, if someone tells you in the present tense, I don't know her phone number, you would report it by changing don't to didn't. He said he didn't know her phone number. Likewise, if you ask someone, what is your name? You would report it with the past tense. I asked her what her name was. Notice the difference in the position of is and was, and the replacement of your with her. When you report statements in the past tense, you change them to either the present perfect or past perfect. We played basketball will become either he told me that they have played basketball, or he told me that they had played basketball. The future tense should be shifted to the conditional. The question, will you help them, becomes, he asked me if I would help them. You need to change will to would and you to I, as well as switch their positions. Reported speech is in some ways simpler than quoted speech because you don't need to use commas and quotation marks. For example, note the comma and the first quotation mark following the word said. In the interview, he said, we played basketball together. This sentence could actually be marked as having a punctuation error in America, simply because the period has been placed after the second quotation mark and not before it. The British do not follow this rule, and its basis is no longer logical or valid. Until the late 20th century, printing relied on mechanical technology, and all characters had to be the same width. Placing commas and periods inside quotation marks had aesthetic and typographical advantages. Today's young students who disapprove of periods in text messages may eventually reject this antiquated rule. We've seen that the positions of clause components are moved in questions and complex sentences. Notice the pronouns what and that, which function as objects in what will he do? I know what he will do. The thing that he did. They have all been moved to the beginning of their dependent clauses. Compliments can also be moved this way in exclamations. Examples are, there they are, how handsome you look, and what a smart girl you are. Normally, relative pronouns immediately follow their antecedent nouns. However, in one student passed the exam who never came to class, the adjective clause has been moved to the end of the sentence. This gives emphasis to the dependent clause, and it underscores why you should use the pronoun who rather than that when referring to people. The meaning of the sentence, one student passed the exam that never came to class, would be less clear. Subjects which are formed by dependent clauses and verbal phrases can also be moved to the ends of sentences. The anticipatory it is used as a placeholder for them. Examples are, it is hard to find a good job, and it matters to her what you think. Compare them with finding a good job is hard, and what you think matters to her. The dummy it is more common than the anticipatory it. Examples are, it is raining again, and I have had it with this weather. We would never ask, what is raining, or what have you had with this weather? However, we could ask, what is hard, and what matters to her? There are three reversible sentence patterns. They are all intransitive. Here is the key is an example of the only common reversible pattern. The other two are examples of either antiquated speech, blessed are the peacemakers, or storytelling. In a large shoe lived an old woman. ColorCodedEnglish.com is a website designed for early readers and ESL students. It offers free apps to learn phonics, vocabulary, and grammar. Please take a look and tell any students you know about it.